I'm here today talking to Richard Arkless, who is the SNP candidate for this year's general election for Dumfries and Galloway. Well, hello Richard.
Hello Karen.
Nice to see you.
And you?
Now we first met during the referendum campaign where we ended up sharing a platform talking on behalf of Yes. But I don't really know that much about you beyond that, so can you tell us just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Born in Stranraer, to parents who were also born in Stranraer, firmly rooted in this region. Like many families in the 70s, we moved to London, stayed there until I was 8, came back with a Cockney accent. Mum and Dad bought a small business in Stranraer, early 80s. It was fairly successful and we've stayed here ever since. It was just interrupted by a period in Glasgow studying twice, 2 degrees, and working in Edinburgh and working in Manchester. And now, over the last 2 or 3 years, been back in Stranraer working from home.
So you've got 2 degrees. Was 1 degree not enough?
There were different times in the 90s. When I left school, I went and studied financial services and risk management. Then after a period of time working in that industry and setting up a smaller business, I went back to university and studied law.
Okay, and you're dual qualified in Scotland and England?
Yes, right? There's different legal systems in Scotland and England and Wales. So I qualified in Scots law, but then went to work in England and was lucky enough to be put through that qualification by the firm that I worked with, and I was lucky enough to pass the exam. So I'm qualified to practice on both sides of the border, although I don't practice at the moment.
You have quite an eclectic background. I wondered, what was it that took you from being an interested observer of politics to actually wanting to become a politician?
It was the referendum, Karen. It was the awakening that happened in Scotland over the last year. I've always been hugely interested in politics and constitutional affairs, but more of a kind of bedtime, midnight reader, as opposed to getting involved in it. And I never really seen the point of getting involved, to be perfectly honest, because I didn't think that Scotland had an effective voice, and I thought that it would be a wasted career move, to be honest, if I ever did take it. But the referendum has changed everything. It's abundantly clear now that Scotland has a strong voice, and it's abundantly clear that if we vote in the right way in May, then we can have a collective strong voice in Westminster. And I genuinely think I've got something to offer that group, and I genuinely think I'd be good at really making a difference in this region.
It's fair to say, Richard, you're not an experienced politician. Do you think that puts you at a disadvantage?
No, absolutely not. I think quite the converse. It puts me at a huge advantage. I think there is an increasing disconnect between elected politicians and the people that they claim to represent. I won't have that. I'm from the real world. I've been living with the same problems, the cost of living crisis that everybody's been living with over the last 5 to 10 years. I understand that. I'm not disconnected from the real world. I'm part of it. So quite from being at a disadvantage, I think it will be a huge advantage. I'll be able to relate and communicate with my electorate and understand the priorities a lot more effectively than somebody who's perhaps been cocooned in a political career path of being a researcher, a councillor and then an MP. I'm from the real world.
I suppose the main question really at the point of this interview is for you to be able to say to people out there why they should vote for you.
Well, I mean, I would answer that in 2 parts. And the first part relates to the policies of the party that I'm representing and how they can benefit the people of Scotland. Now, firstly, our headline message that is that we have a real viable alternative to the austerity economics agenda being pursued by the Westminster parties. Now, austerity is just another name for big, huge cuts. And what the Conservative Party, the Condemn coalition, has outlined last week in the budget is that they're planning to reduce that deficit and obliterate it over the next 5 years, which sounds sensible. But the problem is that by doing it so hard and so fast in a slash and burn type way, is that it has huge moral and social consequences for areas within the United Kingdom that are not able to absorb those cuts. And we say that Scotland and Dumfries and Galloway is top of those lists. Now, we're not saying that we completely forget that the UK has a huge debt and that it's got a very high budget deficit. We're simply saying that instead of doing it over 5 years, we reduce it over a longer period. I mean, why would you remortgage your entire house over 5 years when it would mean that you couldn't put food on the table? If you remortgaged it over 15 years, it would free up some of your budget so you could continue to live. That's what we're saying. It's not rocket scientists, and we've got a viable alternative to austerity.
What about your other priorities, especially for this region?
I'm a social democrat. And what that means is that I believe in social justice, but I've got a pragmatic understanding that that needs to be underpinned by a successful and growing economy. Now, in Dumfries and Galloway, we've watched over the last generation as our economy has essentially taken a nosedive, and a whole range of indicators. Now, I think there's a huge opportunity for an MP from the real world, with real business experience, with real commercial experience, with real understanding of how things work in the real world, and taking that into politics and trying to become not just a letter writer and a ribbon cutter, but a conduit and a real ambassador for business in these communities. Now, I want to work closely with business of all different types across this region, and be an envoy for them, be an ambassador for them, be a marketeer for them, and raise their profile.
What do you mean by that, though?
Well, I mean, I'll give you one example. And a few weeks ago, I've been visiting many businesses in Dumfries and Galloway over the last few weeks, trying to understand the priorities, what they're good at, what perhaps they're not good at, and what the region as a whole is good at. Now, to my surprise, I was in Castle Douglas a few weeks ago, and I discovered that they've got 3 high-end mountain bike shops within around 100 yards of each other. Now, they're not selling penny farthings, they're selling high-end mountain bikes at over £10,000 a pop, and they're selling them quite considerably and making really good money. Then they're not selling to people within our region, they're selling to tourists, because they're starting to develop a real niche and a real expertise for these 7 Staines mountain bike trails that we've got in the region.
So that's a success story already. How can you make that better?
Well, is it a success story? Because I spoke to the professionals that run those shops, and I said, well, this sounds great, what's the problem? And they say, well, we are the best kept secret in Scotland, but we don't want to be the best kept secret in Scotland. Now, there's a whole range of things that those shop owners are powerless to do anything about. There's no train times that leave London, no trains that leave London in the correct time on a Friday night. There's no mountain bike carriages, there's no mountain bike tickets, there's no connections from Carlisle to take them into the Stewartry. And there's tiny little things that I think a position of influence, me in a position of influence as an MP, could knock those things together. The train company will listen to me if I'm on the phone and knocking the door hard enough, where they won't listen to 3 bike shop owners in Castle Douglas. So it's about me understanding what we're good at in this region and trying to knock it all together using the position of influence that an MP will give me.
Is it fair to say that the SNP are going down to Westminster to cause problems and be troublemakers down south?
What I would say is that the SNP haven't got to where they are today by being troublemakers. They're a responsible government, and they have been a very responsible government, elected in a landslide majority a few years ago. Cards on the table, Karen. I support independence. I mean, I would vote yes in another referendum if there were to be one. But that doesn't mean that that's what it's all about. We're never going to be able to convince the 190, 200,000 people that we need to get over the line in the future. We're never going to be able to convince them that independence is a good idea if we're troublemakers. One doesn't follow the other. The way we will demonstrate to the people of Scotland that the people of Scotland are best placed to take the decisions is to make a better job of those decisions than the Westminster system. So it's not in our interest to cause chaos, it's in our interest to protect the interests of the people of Scotland.
Just you mentioned referendum again there, it's a word that we can't get away from.
Yeah.
There's another referendum possibly on the horizon again, depending on who has the balance of power at Westminster. Europe, what do you feel about that, given again that we're in quite a rural and remote area here?
Well, indeed, and I think you touch upon the reasons why it's imperative that Scotland remains within the European Union. Scotland's an exporting nation. Scotland has a high reliance in the rural sector, particularly this region, which is subsidised to a great extent by the cap payments that come from the European Union. So we have got a lot to lose.
Richard Arkless, thank you very much.